Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, land of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. I hope you're having a wonderful Thursday. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on, and they will show up here in my chat room. And hello to Reverend Michael in the chat room. It's good to see you. And today is the solstice, and I want to wish a happy summer solstice to all of our friends watching in the Northern Hemisphere, and to all of our friends in the Southern Hemisphere, a happy winter solstice. And hello to Fox Fur Witch in the chat room. The solstice is the time of the greatest power of the season. Here in the Northern Hemisphere with the summer solstice, the sun is at its height today. It is the high point of the power of the god in the external world. And the winter solstice in the Southern Hemisphere is the low point of the god in the external world, but the high point of those powers internally. And either way, when you reach that high point, then you must change. And for myself, that really is the important part of this Sabbat, that it tells us that when we achieve what we have set out for, when we work for that thing that is important to us, and we accomplish it, well, then we have to do something else. You can't just stay on that plateau. And hello to Reverend Antonio in the chat room. The sun cannot stay at this high solstice point. The days must now, from this longest day of the year, begin to shorten again. Similarly, with the winter solstice, the sun cannot stay at the shortest day of the year. The days must begin to lengthen again. When we achieve our highest point, then we've done it, and we must move on to something else. This is, I think, one of the major secrets of the world, and something that the wider culture actively discourages us from thinking. And hello to Nicholas in the chat room. It's good to see you, Nicholas. The wider culture, particularly through the influence of the Christian religion, teaches the idea that only that which is unchanging matters. Whereas the reality in this physical world, and I think in all existence, is that there is nothing that is unchanging. And then, in fact, it is the journey of change that matters. And while it's wonderful to enjoy these momentary highlights when we achieve a particular goal, they're not permanent. And we must continue moving. And hello to Bimby in the chat room. Now, of course, it's our nature to want to enjoy the moment for a little bit, and that's understandable. But it doesn't mean that we stop the journey. And there's a saying that it's the destination that matters, not the journey, or it's the journey that matters, not the destination. Strike that, reverse it. And yes, I believe this is true. It is the experiences we have in the journey, the things we learn in the journey. Hello to Black Crystal in the chat room. The others that we interact with in the journey, in the end, are more important than the destination. Because the destination is only one step in a still longer journey, no matter what that destination is. Even if we look at the ultimate culmination of our life, which is its end, at least within Corellianism, we don't believe that that's the end of the journey. The soul goes forward. It goes forward on one level as an ancestor, on another level to future incarnations. It has a number of aspects that go forward. The end of one life is not the end of the journey, even for that particular persona, which continues to exist in the afterlife, even while the soul goes on to rebirth, because the soul is not as simple as our conscious mind. It has many aspects. In life, this speaks to how we should look at the things we're doing. Now, this week, we have been talking about emotion. And hello to Brian in the chat room. It's good to see you, Brian. We've talked about happiness. We've talked about love and fear. And today, our title is Inside and Out, based on the movie of the same name, which is an examination of emotions. And this may seem like an odd way to head into it, but I'm going to say to you that as we look at our lives, it is not the things that we do that are most important, but how we do them and what we learn and who we touch as we do them. And, I look at my own life, and, I think I remarked on this the other day. In the many projects I've been involved in over the years with Ed the Pagan, we have had the saying, progress over perfection. We learned very early that perfection was a stopper. It would stop you from ever being able to actually finish. It was far better to focus on progress. If something wasn't perfect when you brought it forward, it was still more important to bring it forward. For example, I've written a number of books in the last year. And, any of those books, I could have spent many more months working on. Would they have been better if I'd done that? I don't know. They'd have been perhaps, certainly longer, but they fulfilled what they were meant to do, which was teach about these different subjects. Are they completely exhaustive? Well, no, nothing's going to be completely exhaustive. I wrote Rev Don's Book of Astrology. I've studied astrology since I was a child. I can tell you, there is no one book that's ever going to contain everything about astrology. Astrology is far too old and too deep a system for one single volume ever to touch on every aspect of it. And if I were to take the time to try to touch on every aspect of astrology, it would be years before I could write anything else. But to write a book teaching you about astrology, teaching you the basics, teaching you some of the intricacies, that was another matter. And it was worth doing that. It didn't have to be the encyclopedia of astrology. And hello to Janet in the chat room. I'm currently working on Rev Don's Book of Numerology. By the way, the order for that book will be going in within a day or so. If you would like to have a copy of it and have that copy in the first order, you might want to pre-order it now. And usually from the time we make the order till the time it gets here is more or less 10 days. So if you've already ordered it, it will be coming to you within a couple of weeks. As soon as they reach here, I will sign them and mail them out. And that's what we do. It is dependent on the speed of the publisher, but the volume itself is currently in the very last stages. And you can find that at CorellianPublishing.com. Now, yesterday was ordinarily our day to talk about CorellianPublishing.com, but we had a very different story yesterday about the attack on Stonehenge in the United Kingdom. And I'll be talking about that again tomorrow on the weekly roundup. And talking about emotions, this is, or certainly should be, a highly emotional issue to our community. And it speaks a lot to what I was discussing on Tuesday. The idea that our reaction to everything that exists is based either on love or fear. And you'll notice that one point I did not make was that fear is bad. Fear on occasion is very good if it's a practical consideration. You have every right to be afraid of sticking your hand into an open fire and keeping it there. It would do bad things to you. On the other hand, you can easily put out a candle flame with your fingertips and not have such a bad effect. It's a matter of knowing what you're doing. But to be afraid of being burnt is not an illogical fear. It is there for a reason. In the same way that we have pain to tell us that something is wrong with our body, or emotional pain to tell us that there's something wrong with our interactions. So I am not taking the point of view that we should only focus on pleasant things and ignore things that are not. What I am saying, and I will say it again, is that we're going to be happier when we focus on the things that bring us happiness and pay attention to those things that we might consider bad when it is necessary to do so. I would never say to ignore them, but to fixate on them is problematic. And I was reading a common Facebook post that I saw again this morning about how supposedly the KGB had once done an experiment where they subjected a group of subjects to 2 months of constant negative messages and found that at the end of that 2 months, they were totally reprogrammed into a certain mindset. And hello to Janet in the chat room. That was very fearful and reactive. And I think that's absolutely credible. And this is why I say don't focus on the things that cause you fear or problems. Not saying don't notice them, not saying don't take practical actions about them. Don't focus on them. And, as I look at our community at large and at the pagan community in past years, although I think in some ways the pagan community has made some progress. But I think that there has been far too much focus on the negative, far too much obsession on the negative, and far too much obsession on disruptive emotion. When I was young, back in the dawn of history, all of the obsession of the metaphysical world seemed to be on the emotions versus the thinking mind. Everyone wanted to be in touch with their emotions. Everyone wanted to be freely channeling their emotions. And in and of itself, this is good. I think at a certain point, it was taken too far. And we became so in touch with our emotions that we became disabled by them as a society. And I think we see that everywhere we look. I can remember people used to love to talk in the pagan community about how they loved spirited debate. I do not. I love diplomacy and cooperation and polite conversation about ideas. I am not fond of the idea of debating ideas at all. Discussing them, seeing where we have similarities and where we have differences in a civil manner is wonderful. But for years, people used this idea of, quote, spirited debate to beat up on each other and to try to force their opinions on everyone. And you see that today in society everywhere. I've often talked about how much I despise the concept of consensus decision-making for this reason. Because as a general rule, what it actually comes down to is the biggest bully forces their way and simply eliminates everyone else. Having a consensus is a wonderful thing. Thinking that everyone must agree on every subject is basically just a blueprint for bullying everyone, because that's not going to happen unless people are forced into line. And in the chat room, Ed the Pagan says, "Hear, hear." Yes, absolutely. So, what I would like to say to you is to focus on those good things in your life, those things that bring you happiness. And don't ignore problems, don't ignore bad things, but don't let them obsess you. Let the good things obsess you. And in your life, don't be active, don't be reactive. Pick the good things you want to do rather than reacting to things that other people do. You'll be so much happier if you do this. And, we started our conversation today with the solstice and how solstice marks that moment when, for the summer solstice, the sun has reached its greatest power and must begin to decline. How, whenever we reach a plateau, we must move on from it. In talking about how people were so obsessed with focusing on their emotions, it's our nature to take things too far. And then, when we've reached the furthest extent, we must turn around. We are there. And hello to Steve in the chat room. One of the things that I also remember from my childhood, I'm very big on the concept of yin and yang as a way of understanding the universe, or goddess and god, or however you want to put it. Both of which, however, if you truly understand them, are aspects of the same power. They are movement of that power. When I was young, the concept of yin and yang was very popular, but not well understood by many people. And one of the things that people did not get about it is that yin is looking inward, yang is looking outward. And the yin energy will go as far inward as it can. This is involution. And that yin energy will involve itself as deeply within as it can go. But when it gets there, it can go no farther. It must turn around, it must change. And then it becomes the yang energy. And it evolves outward. And this is a constant movement of existence. It's a constant movement of us also. In the 1920s and 30s, there were a lot of people trying desperately to control their emotions. If you look at parenting tips from especially the 1920s, they're horrifying by our standards because they were all about ignoring emotion in replacing it with rigidity and structure. This was partly a reaction to the First World War, and to some extent, a continuation of Edwardian themes. But that First World War was so emotionally destructive to so many who lived through it that they looked for all kinds of ways to distance themselves from their emotions because they couldn't deal with it. And I don't know how a person living today in the United States or Western Europe could understand the emotional state those people were in. Some people in other parts of the world certainly can, but not in these areas. And so they distanced themselves from emotion. The next generation down were the generation coming up when I was young, the baby boomer generation. And they went to the opposite extreme. They wanted to get rid of all of that rigidity, all of that conformity, all of that rejection of emotion. And they took it to the furthest extreme. As a community, as a society, we wallow in emotion. Now, Ed says, maybe cultural PTSD. They called it shell-shocked in World War I. Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what it was. This is also, it wasn't entirely negative. This is why the Roaring Twenties were the Roaring Twenties in part. It was a symptom of that cultural PTSD because it expressed itself both in that rejection of emotion, and also in the indulgence of things that had formerly been frowned upon or forbidden, that also really opened the world in some ways. It was a very interesting time. It was an opening of so many things. Um, I consider myself extraordinarily lucky to have been born in a time when the people who lived through that period were still living, and still able to talk about it. Um, because today, you only have their recorded words and images, and you can't really get a feeling for what they were like or for what they experienced. Um, but it was a vast bloodletting in Europe in particular. And it also had an effect which for us as pagans is very important, in that it totally crippled the Christian church for decades, because the church wholeheartedly backed that war and backed every side of the war against each other, saying that God backs this country for every country. And it became very clear to people, A, that can't quite be, and two, or B, um, be a pretty bad deity to have thought this was a good thing, because the bloodshed and destruction of that war was unlike anything else that certainly that Europe has experienced. They're still digging up unexploded bombs from that period that occasionally still go off. The bombing was so heavy, the fighting was so fierce. Um, so the fact that a large portion of society then um, tried to distance itself from their emotional PTSD isn't surprising. The fact that their children then embraced their emotions and worked very hard to throw off um, that rejection of emotion is not surprising either. And what I hope to see now will also not be surprising. If the next generation rejects the kind of extreme emotion that we're seeing everywhere today. I look at contemporary figures across the board in many cases. And while there's some really wonderful people out there, um, and one who's been very big in the news lately is Dolly Parton, who has been a wonderful figure, very exemplary, I think, of every virtue. But the reason she's been so big in the news lately is she's being condemned by conservative Christians for being such an accepting person. Um, but most of the people who you see in the news today seem to suffer from emotional diarrhea. They're emoting all over everything and they can't seem to control it. They can't seem to rein in their commentaries. They certainly can't seem to cooperate with anyone. Um, a result of which is they often can't accomplish anything. This is not a constructive state to be in. So when we go back to that message of focusing on the good things in your life and doing that next right thing, which is always the correct choice, one of the things that this should do for you is make it easier for you to work with other people. Make it maybe a little bit easier to see their point of view and to find common ground with them to be able to accomplish things. And, I think a lot of people running around today would say, why should I find common ground with someone I disagree with? And the answer is, well, you're not going to get anything done if you don't. And, as I look at our community, that's been our number one problem as far back as I can think. Not being able to get along for our mutual purposes. Not being able to work together to accomplish the things our community needs. There have been those in the community who could, and there have been moments when the community was able to come together, but by and large, we've been so busy fighting um, that many of the things we needed to do simply were not and could not be done. And going back to yesterday's story, the attack on Stonehenge, it's one of only a number of attacks in our community in recent months. There have been people intentionally disrupting pagan events, people breaking into ongoing pagan ceremonies to disrupt them and or disband them. As a community, we should be up in arms over this, and we should be united in our response to it. Are we? No, we're still arguing over nonsense by and large. And this is why we can't have good things, to use the common phrase. Until we can overcome our differences and stand together, the only thing I can say is that only the largest traditions and organizations are going to be able to do anything. Of course, this is to some extent human nature. And that's why we have organizations. But how much better if, as a community, we could set aside our differences and work together on things like climate action, like ecology, like our civil rights, without fighting over every tiny little doctrinal or political difference. We would be so much farther along than we are. And, it's so easy to be drawn into conflict. It's so easy to be convinced that so-and-so is someone you should never deal with. And so hard to come together when you need to. And so, again, I'm going to go back to my main message for this week. Don't focus on the differences. Don't focus on the bad things. Focus on the good things. Focus on what you need to do. Focus on what will benefit you. Focus on what makes your life better. And if you do that, your life will be better. And, I'm going to repeat something I said the other day, that I was once accused of being the sort of person who, if I were living homeless on the beach or in a cardboard box on the street, would find a way to be happy that way. And you're damn right I would. Doesn't mean I would not still try to find a way to change it. But yes, I would be looking for the things to make me happy while I was also looking for ways to change it. And that's how I've survived life. I've faced a lot of challenges, a lot of physical challenges, a lot of political challenges, a lot of economic challenges in my life, like pretty much everyone. And for me, the secret of surviving all of this has been to find the happiness that is always there. And that, in the end, if you hear nothing else that I ever say, is the one thing I hope that you will internalize for yourself. There's always good around you. Happiness is always possible, and you should always embrace it. Don't ignore the bad. Try to change the things that cause you problems. Try to fix what needs fixing, certainly. But don't make it your focus of life. Because if you do, you're going to be miserable. I was talking on Tuesday about Corrie ten Boom and her experiences in the concentration camps in Germany in World War II, and how she still managed to keep hope alive, even in that terrible circumstance, even as her beloved sister died. She still found ways to keep her joy in life, despite terrible hardship and sorrow. I talked about many of the disabled people I have known and at certain times in life been, and how, despite sometimes profound disabilities, they could be very happy in their lives and very successful in their lives because they chose to be. They found the ways to be. And they didn't focus on just what they could not do, but on what they could. And I think this will always carry you forward. And that's not to say you're never going to be frustrated. It's not to say you'll never be worried. It's not to say that there won't be problems. But I think you'll find it's the best answer to moving past them, to be able to see the good things while simultaneously taking practical action to overcome the bad ones. So with that, I see we've come to the end of our half hour. Tomorrow we'll be back with our weekly roundup of interesting stories. I hope you'll join me then. I want to thank everyone who has joined me today. I love spending this time with you. I love talking with you. Um, Again, if you would like to get a copy of Reverend Don's Book of Numerology, you can pre-order that at Reverend Don's or Book of Numerology at CorellianPublishing.com, and it will go into that very first order, which will be going in within a day or so, and we'll get to you as soon as possible. So I hope you've had a wonderful day, and let us close with our prayer as we always do. And Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to keep our hearts and our minds open, and to see the good things around us and to make the most of them. Help us also to see the problems and the difficulties, and to overcome them in the most positive ways. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to always remind us of your presence and of the good that is always in the world. And knowing you are always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always, and I'll see you tomorrow.